Welcome to the Center for Writing and Languages presentation on MLA format and documentation. Today I'm just going to be giving you an overview. If you really want to know how to use MLA, it's important to purchase the MLA handbook for writers of research papers. This handbook is currently in its 7th edition. It's a sort of a dark blue cover, and what I'm going to be showing you today is just really the basics, and it's good to have the handbook for your own reference, especially if you're going to be using this in your discipline. MLA stands for the Modern Language Association, and so this style is used mostly in courses and in fields regarding English and other modern languages, the linguistics and the literature of those languages. Also here at Liberty, some of the comms or communications courses use MLA as well. Many schools use MLA at the high school level and at the early college level as well, mainly because it's so simple. MLA is probably the simplest and most straightforward documentation style, and that's good news for us. One thing that's so simple about MLA is that there's no front matter required. There is a way to do a cover page in MLA, but most professors do not prefer it. There's no cover page, there's no abstract, there's no table of contents, unless you're writing a very long document like a thesis or dissertation. So when you start an MLA paper, generally you're just jumping right in on the first page. And here's an example of what the first page of an MLA paper looks like. You'll notice there's a header up there in the right-hand corner that's going to appear on every page, and that's just your last name and the page number. I'm not going to take the time right now to show how to insert a header because there are many different versions of Microsoft Word and other word processing programs, and I don't want to confuse anybody, but typically if you double click at the very top of the page, that's how you'll open up your header, and then it's pretty clear from there. Then all the other information that would typically go on a cover page is going to go on the left-hand top corner of the page. This is in the body of the paper, not the header. You're going to put your name, your professor's name, the course that you're turning this in for, and then finally the date you're turning it in. And MLA uses the European style of doing a date, so you're going to start with the date, then you're going to include the month, and then finally the year. No commas involved there. Finally, the last thing that you're going to type before you go into the body of your paper is the title. Just a reminder about titles, make sure that your title is both informative and interesting. This is actually not a good example of a title analytical paper. You want your title to draw your readers in, but also to describe what they're getting into when they're going to read your paper. A couple other formatting comments about MLA. Everything in an MLA paper is double spaced. There's no single spacing, there are no extra spaces. There's actually a mistake on this. There should not be an extra space after the title. So you can just go ahead and set your document to double spacing and keep it that way the whole way through. Your margins should be 1 inch all the way around, and oh no, I forgot the other thing I was going to say. Your margin should be 1 inch all the way around, and for font, you want to use Times New Roman most of the time. The MLA manual suggests Times New Roman, but most professors take that as a requirement, so it's a good idea, again, to just make that your default setting on your word processing program. So that's very simple, and that's really all you need to know about formatting an MLA paper. Very simple. So now let's talk about citing your sources. MLA uses what we call a, MLA uses parenthetical citations, which means that you won't have any footnotes and you won't have any endnotes unless perhaps you're writing a very long document like a thesis or dissertation. You might use explanatory endnotes, but you'll never be citing your sources in notes. They will be in text. Here's an example of what a parenthetical citation looks like. We've got the author's last name, and then we have the page or range of pages in this case because the information comes from more than one page. Now, with different documentation styles, the way that they do the citations shows what information is prioritized. So for example, in the social sciences, they typically use APA, and the dates are very important because they want to show that they're using very recent sources. Well, that's not the case in MLA because in this discipline, the field doesn't change very quickly, and also many times you're going to be citing primary sources or much older sources. You're going to be analyzing them as literature. So it doesn't really matter how old your sources are, so you're not putting the date in the parenthetical citation. What is important, however, is the page numbers, because lots of times in MLA fields, you, instead of just giving an overview of the source, you're actually going to be looking at very specific passages, and often you're going to be quoting directly. And so that's why the page numbers are important, because you want your readers to be able to find the source. So a basic citation always has the author's last name and then the page number or numbers. Now you'll notice something a little strange here. You'll see that we have a number that's in the hundreds. It's actually in the 300s, and that hundreds place is dropped off on the second number. MLA is all about shortening things, abbreviating, making things as brief as possible. You'll also notice here that the parenthetical citation goes before the final period in the sentence. There is one exception to that, which I'll talk to you about in a moment, but in general you want to get into the habit of putting that final period or whatever punctuation mark it is after that parenthetical citation. So you might be wondering what to do with a source that has no page number. The first thing you want to do is to get into the habit of, as much as you can, locating sources that do have page numbers. For example, if you're downloading a web source or an article from a website and you have the choice between an HTML document that looks like a web page or a PDF that looks like the original source, download the PDF because that's going to have the original page numbers of the source. But we understand sometimes there are sources that simply don't have them, such as websites. The best answer to that question is to ask your professor. There are several things you can do. You can include the paragraph number where you got the information, preceded by the abbreviation PAR, period. That can be very helpful to your readers. There's also an abbreviation for no page, N period, PAG period. That's not very helpful to your readers, but at least it shows that you're not making an error and you know that you should include the page number, you just don't have any. So with many things, including this, you want to ask your professor what their preference is for when there's no page number. So here's an example of a citation of a source, a summarized source. Here's an example of a citation of a directly quoted source. Obviously, when you quote something directly and use the exact words, you are going to put quotation marks around that source. Your quotation mark comes before the parenthetical citation. So the order would be this: end of the quote, then your quotation marks, then your parenthetical citation, then a period. Now you'll notice that in this citation we don't have the author's last name, and that's because the author's last name, Chuck Palahniuk, already appears in that sentence. So again, MLA is always about abbreviating things and making them short as possible and not taking up a lot of extra space. If you have your author's name already appearing in the sentence, you don't need to put it again in the parenthetical citation. We also have a type of quotation called a block quotation, and this is a long quote. The rule for MLA is a block quotation is any quote that's longer than 4 lines. So if you start typing onto the 5th line, then you're going to have a block quote. First, I want to give you a word of caution about block quotations. You don't want to have too many of them in a paper, because sometimes professors look at that and say, there's just way too much here and this person's just trying to fill up space. So before you include a block quote, look carefully at it and make sure that all that information really does need to be in your paper, and maybe you can omit some of it. But sometimes we do need to have a block quotation, maybe if it's a passage that you're analyzing very closely. And so in that case, there are 3 rules that you need to remember about block quotes. The first rule is that you are going to indent the entire thing 1 inch. That's actually 2 tabs, longer than you would indent a regular paragraph. The second thing that you need to know about a block quotation is that there are no quotation marks around a block quotation. That seems kind of counterintuitive, but the reason for that is that the fact that it's indented already alerts your reader to the fact that this is a quote. So you don't need to add any quotation marks around a block quotation. The third thing you need to know, and this is the exception that I mentioned before, you're actually going to put the parenthetical citation after the final period in the case of a block quote. Normally, like I said, the parenthetical citation is before the period, but in the case of a block quote, it is after the period. So that's basically all we need to know about citing sources in the text. It's very simple: author, page number. So now let's talk about how you're going to cite sources at the end of your paper. And in MLA, this is called a works cited. It's not called a bibliography. It's not called references. It's just, you will type out the words works cited. And if you think about it, that actually makes a lot of sense, because in your works cited, you're only citing sources that actually appear in your paper. Your works cited and your parenthetical citation should match up. You'll start this at the top of a new page, so you may have some blank space at the end of the last page of your body. And it will be center aligned, or I'm sorry, the words works cited will be center aligned at the top. The sources are going to be in alphabetical order by whatever comes first. Typically, this is going to be the author's last name, as I'll show you in a minute, but occasionally we have sources that don't have an author, and in those cases, the first thing listed is going to be the title. So you will be alphabetizing by whatever comes first. Second thing you need to know about a works cited is that it's going to have a hanging indent. This is the opposite of a regular paragraph indent. You know, in a paragraph, typically you indent the first line, and then all the other subsequent lines are flush left. Well, hanging indent is the exact opposite. The first line is flush left, and then any line that comes after it is going to be indented. You can do this by hitting the tab key, but sometimes that messes up the formatting. So the best thing to do is to actually set a hanging indent on your page. Again, I won't explain how to do that because it's different for different programs, but it's typically in the same place where you would go to set your margins and your spacing. So here's what an MLA Works Cited looks like, and this one actually doesn't have any hanging indents because they're all very short citations, but I'll show you one in a little while here that does. You can see that it's in alphabetical order and that everything continues to be double spaced. We don't have any kind of special spacing going on in the Works Cited. Now I'm going to show you how to cite some individual types of sources. I won't cover everything. You will want to get the book for some kinds of unusual sources, like citing a movie maybe, or citing some personal communication, citing a book that's a translation, but I'm going to show you some of the basic ones that tend to appear in fields that use MLA. Oh, and as we're pointing out here, that the header continues to be on the Works Cited page. All right, here's how to cite a book. And this book, actually, we have a little bonus feature here. This one shows you how to cite a book that has 2 or more authors, because this actually does happen fairly frequently. The first author's name is going to be in reverse order. So we start with the author's last name, then the author's first name. That's only true for the first author, so if you have more than one author, the rest of the people are going to be just in regular first name, last name order. Notice too, and this is different from some of the other documentation styles, you'll actually write out the word and. You will not use an ampersand here. Then we have the title with a period preceding it. The title in MLA of a book or anything that is the length of a book. So a movie, a play, a title of a journal, which I'll show you in a minute here. All of those things will be italicized. The next thing that you see here is an edition number. Not all books need to include this information. In fact, if your book is a first edition, we're just assuming that books are first edition. That's sort of the default setting, so you never have to type first ed here. But if it's the second or any subsequent edition, then you'll type the edition number there. The next bit of information there is the city where it was published. If it's a well-known city, you don't need to put the state. If it is not a well-known city, you can use your judgment on that. You will use the 2-letter postal abbreviation. Then we have a colon, and then we have the publisher's name. Now, as I keep emphasizing, MLA likes for you to abbreviate things. And so for the publisher's name, and I'll give you a list of these abbreviations at the end, you're never going to write out, for example, W.W. Norton, Inc. It will always be abbreviated to Norton. In this case, you can see what we do with a university press. Instead of writing University of Chicago Press, we're actually writing U of Chicago P, which looks a little funny, but it does save some space. Then we have a comma, and then we have the year in which the book was published, not the day or the month or anything like that, just the year. Then we have a period, and then we have something that's new to this 7th edition of MLA, and that is the medium type. Most of the medium types that you cite are either going to be print or web. There are some other types. I recently cited a source where the medium type was Blu-ray disc, but this is unusual. It will usually be print or web, just that one word and then a period. So this is how you cite a book. Now let's look at citing a work in an anthology, because this is actually pretty common in some of your English classes, like English 102 in your literature surveys. You'll be citing a work in an anthology. So you can see it starts out with the author's name. Then we have something in quotation marks. This is the title of a short story. Anything that is shorter than a book, the title will go in quotation marks. So that may be a short story, it may be a poem, unless it's a book-length poem. It may be a journal article or a magazine article, which I'll show you in a moment as well. But anything that's shorter than a book or that's just part of a whole, that will be in quotation marks. Next you can see here, and this is again kind of a bonus, not all stories will have this, but you can see that this story has a translator because it was originally written in Spanish. If your work has a translator, you will use the abbreviation trans, period, and then the translator's name after the name of the story. Then you can see here in italics is the title of the book itself, the book where that story appears. And then finally we have the name of an editor. Usually works in an anthology do have an editor or more than one editor, and so we'll put their name there with the abbreviation ed. The rest of this information looks a lot like the typical citation for a book. You're going to have the city and the publisher and the year. The additional little bit of information there is the page numbers. Those are the pages where that story appears in that book. And then finally, we have our medium type. Here's how to cite a dictionary entry, which is not typically commonly cited in MLA fields, but it might be. The first thing we have there is actually the name of the article. Dictionary entries and most encyclopedia articles as well are unsigned, so we're usually not going to have an author's name here. So we have the title of the article, then we have the name of the dictionary. The edition number is very important here because most dictionaries are not in their first edition. Then we have the year, and then we have print. With the dictionary, because dictionaries are well known, you don't need to put the city and the state and the publisher, just the date. All right, articles and periodicals. These are increasingly cited more often in MLA fields. And here is an example. We have, again, the author's name, then we have the title of the article in quotation marks, and then we have the title of the journal where it was published in italics. Don't get the journal article and the journal itself mixed up. The article is the individual, it's the short thing that you read. The journal, that word refers to a publication that comes out on a quarterly basis or maybe a monthly basis. So the journal is in italics. And then the next thing you see there is the volume number. And then we have the date in parentheses, and then we have the range of pages, and then finally, of course, the medium type. Now notice a note here. Sometimes we'll also include the issue number. You don't always have to include the issue number, however, in MLA. If the pagination or the paging starts over again with each separate issue, then you do include the issue number. You leave it out if the pagination is continuous, which a lot of journals have. My personal advice here is to check with your professor on their preferences, and when in doubt, to always cite the issue number. It's better to have it than not to include it if you needed it. Now, how to cite a web source. This is actually fairly simple because there's a lot of information that you normally won't have. However, I'm going to give you all the information that you would give if it was available to you. You would start with the author of a page, or the editor, the person who sort of curates the entire website. Then you will put the title of the site. This is considered a standalone work, so it is going to be italicized. Name of corporate provider if there is one given. Lots of times there is not one given. In that case, you would use NP. Date of the publication. Then you have your medium type, and then there's actually something that comes after the medium type in this case, and that's the date when you accessed it. So the day that you found this source and used it or decided to use it in your paper, that's the date that you would include at the end here. All right, this is cited actually quite frequently, much more frequently than you would cite a print article. This is an article in a database. So we have the author's name, we have the article title. This actually looks very similar to, it looks exactly like the way that you would cite a journal article. Notice this kind of odd looking thing here. It says 56 PARS. That means 56 paragraphs. This is an example of a source that did not have the original page numbers. Now, as I said, as much as you can, you want to find sources that have those original page numbers, usually a PDF document, but in this case, this person did not have them, so they did put the number of paragraphs there. Next thing they're going to put here is the subscription service. JSTOR is a very commonly used subscription service. You also might see Academic Search Complete. You might use, if you were in psychology, use psych articles, all those different, the place where you go to find the information that you're looking for when you go to the Liberty Library website, the database that you find it in. Cengage, ProQuest is another big one. That will actually be italicized. Then you put the word web, of course, and then finally, again, this is the date that you accessed it, not the date that it was written. All right, here's some information about abbreviations. I mentioned this before, but make sure that you are abbreviating geographic locations within your sources. So Ohio abbreviates to OH, as you can see there. In the MLA manual, there actually is a whole page that lists all those postal abbreviations for the states, but you can also find that on the United States Post Office website. And you're also going to even abbreviate countries, and there is a list of these in the book. And then list of common publishers' names. I mentioned Norton. Yeah, you would never put W.W. Norton and Sons publishers. You would just say Norton. That's probably actually one of the most common publishers that is used within MLA. For a further listing of abbreviations, see the MLA handbook. And then finally, I want to reiterate to you two things here with this slide. One is that we're showing you that we cited our sources as well. All the information that I gave you today came out of the MLA handbook for writers of research papers. I also want to encourage you, as I said before, to purchase this for yourself. It is not expensive. It's a great thing to have. I myself, I know MLA style very well, but I always find myself going back and checking the handbook for things that I'm not sure about, or even that I am sure about, and I just want to, just have that reassurance to see it there. I want to remind you again that the MLA handbook is in its 7th edition. Well, thank you for viewing this presentation. If you have questions, we would encourage you to contact the Center for Writing and Languages. We do have resources about MLA documentation as well as all the other documentation styles on our website, which is liberty.edu/CWL. We have a web guide about MLA and some other information. You can also find our email addresses and our phone numbers on that website where you can contact us if there's an answer to a question that you just can't find in the handbook or on our website. Thank you again for joining me for this overview.